Welcome to Session 2 of Course 4 on developing and using rubrics to support NGSS teaching and learning. In this session, we'll discuss how to use your analysis of student work to develop a SNAP multidimensional rubric designed to help you efficiently identify patterns in your student work that can guide you and your students in developing their three-dimensional reasoning. As we discussed in the last session, rubrics need to be efficient and easy for teachers and students to use, and at the same time, they need to provide rich information that helps communicate actionable information about where each student is progressing and where they need more attention. The evaluation system needs to be carefully constructed to balance these two needs. If these two are out of balance, either the evaluation system is so difficult to use or uninformative that it's ignored or interpreted differently than intended, or it fails to be useful for improvement. Often, a rubric that doesn't communicate actionable information, no matter how innovative the assessment is in probing students' ideas, becomes reduced to a score or a grade, which can actually supersede any educative benefit of the assessment to students, since grades have the power to divert attention away from feedback that can support ongoing learning. For these reasons, the design of the SNAP multidimensional rubrics is oriented toward ensuring that information can guide ongoing learning is in the foreground. This is a new model of rubrics that we developed specifically for guiding feedback on NGSS learning. Although it's a bit more time-consuming to develop than typical scoring systems, we find it saves time on the other end. It's much easier to use when analyzing complex, open-ended 3D responses than typical rubrics, and it enables an unusual level of efficiency in the ways it helps you support your students' science learning. The individual rubrics visually show how students are using each dimension, but the actual descriptions in the rubrics describe performances that fully integrate dimensions together, again, to explicitly communicate what's important. The system does use points, but mainly as a tool to connect the multiple rubrics to the performance levels, which summarize how these dimensions are used across the whole performance assessment. Still, the points can overshadow all the other information if the rubric is used in ways that it's not intended. Session 3 describes strategies for using these tools to help teachers and students focus on specific, actionable ideas for growth, instead of simply assigning a fixed score to the product or performance assessment, though in some cases they are used for grading after students use them to guide improvements to their work and reflect on their progress. This session will walk you through the development of your own multidimensional rubrics following SNAP's model. We'll start by creating a draft of a SNAP multidimensional rubric for your assessment. We won't worry about making it perfect yet, because you can agonize forever about wording choices and points. Instead, we'll make something functional, and we'll use a peer review process with another team to help quickly identify and fix problem areas. Once the rubric is revised, you'll use Session 2c to create a draft version that you can share with students. We'll start by building on work from Course 3, so we'll begin with a review of where we left off. We did a lot of the groundwork in Course 3, so we'll make use of all that work here. In Course 3, we selected a sample of student work, and we used the 3 dimensions that we decided were being measured to sort the responses into 3 categories: low, medium, and high. As we sorted the student work, we kept a list of the criteria we used to make decisions about which category the student work fell into. As we looked at more student work, sometimes the boundaries between each category changed. We kept adding more student work until the descriptions of each category stabilized. During this session, we'll use the student work you organized and described during Course 3 to build your rubric. Of course, most people find when they pilot that they want to heavily revise their assessment, so repiloting before taking this course is ideal, even if it just means giving a handful of willing students the assessment or finding another teacher to try the assessment for you. If you repiloted, you need to do the organizing student work step again. You'll need to select a sample of your new student work, highlight the dimensions, and use the highlighted dimensions to help you organize the responses into 3 levels. For this session, you'll also need to update your description of how students are using the dimensions being assessed in each level. If you didn't take courses 2 or 3, you should follow option 2 to pilot and organize your student work. A link on the platform will lead you directly to the relevant part of course 2 and course 3 to guide that work. Let's do a brief overview of the rubric development process and how it fits into all the work you've done so far. In courses 2 and 3, we completed all of these steps by using SNAP's process and design principles to create a 3D performance assessment and using analysis of the student work to guide improvements and revisions to ensure that the assessment is meeting our quality criteria. If the rubric is to support the use of the assessment as part of ongoing learning, it needs to match the same design principles. For us, that means that we get to take advantage of a lot of the groundwork done in previous steps. Our 4-step process for rubric design begins by describing how students are using the dimensions being assessed across a 4-level progression, which will form the foundation of our 4 performance levels. Then we'll build rubrics that describe in much more detail how students use each dimension in their response to each question. Once a draft of the whole guide is written, we'll test it against samples of student work to make sure that using the rubric helps us accurately represent students' performance, and we'll fill any gaps we find in the rubric based on that test. The first step begins with the work we did in course 3. We'll focus just on the medium level responses. Often medium contains the widest range. We can easily see what's high and what's low, and medium is just what's in between. But now we're ready to tease apart the high and low within this range. Here are just the medium level responses. In a minute, we'll have you examine them more closely. They're color-coded so you can easily see how students are using the different dimensions. We'll also have the table that we use to record the characteristics of all 3 levels. We need to separate the medium level into 2 parts and modify these descriptors to distinguish medium high and medium low. Practice turning 3 levels into 4 by using the Dear Task data on the screen. Follow the instructions on the screen to examine these 4 responses and figure out which ones represent medium high and medium low. Then decide how you would modify the table to reflect those decisions. You can find these data and this table in your blank rubric template, or you can just work off the screen here. Pause now. You can see how we separated the student work into medium high and medium low. Does this look similar to what you did? I found the first piece of student work to be an interesting example to explore. In the next session, we'll talk about giving direct feedback to students, but just reading it on my own, I wasn't sure if the student is using the DCI or not. The student could be using the term afford to talk about resource availability, but in their own words. Or they could be bringing in unrelated ideas, but I can't really tell without more explicit reasoning. So I placed the student in the medium-low category, and I refined that category to say that responses in this category do provide some reasoning, like this student, but it's implicit. In other words, this student may be starting to do the reasoning in their head, but they didn't really explain it to the reader. Also, this student describes the evidence, but the reasoning doesn't explain how the evidence supports the claim. And based on the second medium-low response here, I added that reasoning may be totally missing, since you can see there's no orange here. If your analysis of the medium-level Dear Task data was very different from ours, you might spend a few minutes after this video reflecting on those differences together, because the next step is to do the same analysis with your own student work. You'll go back to your student work analysis spreadsheet from course 3, and you'll look at your own medium level responses for each prompt that you're assessing. And you'll do the same exact thing. You'll divide them into medium low and medium high, and you'll add a line in your table to make room for another description. And you'll record the trends that you see that help you distinguish the low and high responses in the medium level. When you're done with your new expanded table, you'll be ready for the next video.